I'm not trying to have any excuses, but I can see now, although I was coming home from work during those days and going on with my life seemingly unfazed, you know, the stress of all of it was definitely compounding. And I did that type of work for 7 years in the beginning of my career.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of 8's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Greetings, compadres. This is exciting for me today. I've been interviewing recently some of my fellow sober curator friends and getting to know them, which is awesome. Shout out, Elise. We love you long time. And today I have a guest who I'm really excited about having on here. And I'm just like tinkled. I'm tinkled pink. That's what I am, tinkled. I'm tickled. I'm tickled pink. She is sweet and she's fun. And here's what I love about her. I'm just going to tell this story because this is the best thing ever. So my guest and I were in a group setting a while back, and it was her turn to talk. And she basically got on, unmutes, and is just like, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. I feel lost. I don't know what's happening. And I was so drawn to her because I was like, yes. I mean, it was just authentic. It was genuine. It was relatable. And it was like all the things that I was thinking and feeling at that time, but like wasn't saying. So I loved so much that she vocalized them and had the courage to do that. And so, not only is she goal oriented and everything, but she's also totally real. What is that, right? Amazing and wonderful is what it is. And so she's one of a kind. Her name is Kate Vitela. I am so excited to have you here today, Kate. And I'm going to just tell the listeners a little bit about you from your bio. So Kate she inhabits the Pacific Northwest here with her husband and stepson and 100-year-old dog. Is that correct?
I think my dog is 100. I'm not sure.
I love it. And she's been an RN for 22 years. When she got sober 5 years ago, she shifted her nursing career to mental health and addiction. She works for a company that runs inpatient treatment centers across Washington for those in psychiatric crisis. Such an important job. Thank you for that, Kate. Because roughly 7 or 8 years ago, she herself was detained in a psych hospital in Seattle for suicidal ideation, manic, and being gravely disabled mentally, AKA she had a big fat nervous breakdown. When Kate got sober in 2018, she needed to revitalize and repurpose her failing nursing career. So she hit the books. She started studying addiction medicine and behavioral health so she could get board certified in psych, mental health, nursing, and addiction. She also began researching the correlation between addiction and eating disorders because that was a huge area Kate struggled in as well. And about 2 years ago, she started modeling, basically to show her 44-year-old self it was possible. You go, girl, get it. And also to show the world how beautiful a woman in recovery can be. The beautifulest, in my opinion. She writes a column for the Sober Curator called Walk Your Talk, discussing how we can uncover and cover ourselves with dress. Fashion has always been a huge passion of hers and has become her creative outlet in recovery. Welcome, Kate. I'm pumped you're here. And I would love it so much if you would just feel open and comfortable to share whatever it is that you would like to share about your background, things that sort of happened in your life that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Amy. So, well, where to start? Well, I think it's important to note in my story that I am not a person who drank in high school or college. I was not one of those people that says they had their first drink when they were 9 or 12 or what have you. Um, and I really didn't, I had a pretty good childhood. I was very, goal driven, and I can't point out any big, like, major life issues. For me, my issues with alcohol didn't even start until my mid to late 20s, after I had already become a registered nurse. And I was married young, but I was married. I owned my first home. I was, climbing the ranks at the local hospital, and sort of the pressure on of the world just kind of crashed down on me. And well, I can't even say the word crashed. It's more like creeped, right? Because it was so insidious in how it sort of snuck up on me. So to think that I'd be sitting here today talking about overcoming addiction and mental health and disordered eating is baffling to my, to my younger sort of happy-go-lucky high school self. But when I dig deep, it's not that baffling. Um, so yeah, so partook in some significant heavy drinking into my 20s and 30s. And by the age of 38, I was, gosh, I had hit such a low rock bottom that I really had no choice but to get sober. Every part of my life was falling apart, from my career to my relationships to my mental health, physical health. My finances were a wreck. I mean, the story, right? Like, I just I was a mess. But when I really look back on all of it and sort of dissect it as a nurse and as a stepmom and, a woman, I look back on the timeline of things, and yeah, I can kind of see how I fell into the trap that I did. But I'm really proud to say that I have turned that around in a lot of ways. By when I say revitalize my career, I mean, like, pulled it up out of the garbage. I mean, I was in hot water as a nurse. I was in trouble with the nursing commission. I had burned every bridge in my local community. Like, I was not even hireable. So I had to reinvent myself and really rebuild. And that is part of the reason that I felt so inclined to hit the books and understand. I also thought it was really important because, as us in recovery, we spend a lot of time in recovery circles. And there's a lot of really knowledgeable people in terms of about the story of addiction. There's a lot of people are very knowledgeable, and most people have more sober time than me. So they have all these nuggets of wisdom, and people tend to throw out almost like medical advice. And there's a lot of armchair quarterbacks that, that have the answers to it all, the keys to the kingdom. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm really curious, what are they teaching doctors and nurses about addiction? Like, if I were to enroll in a class, what are the scientists and doctors and medical people, what are they teaching? Because I was listening to so much advice from so many people, and I was, I always think through things as with my nursing brain, because I've been a nurse since I was 21 years old. And so I think about things medically. And so that was part of the reason why I dug in, and I wanted to understand more about the DSM, for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for diagnosing people with addiction disorders, and how we're talking and teaching medical providers to approach the care. That was another area I was really curious on. So yeah, all of it just kind of came full circle.
That in and of itself, I mean, thank you so much for bringing all of that up and for delving into it so richly, because it's such an important thing. I feel like in the conversations that I've had with my doctors who have known me for years, some are newer, But those ones who have known me forever, a couple of them said about my addiction, well, I had no idea. And I was like, well, you had no idea because I never asked for help. I lied. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm only drinking this much every week, whatever. And you can't help somebody who isn't honest with you and telling you really what's going on. And so, I felt badly that they felt badly. And I just thought, I wonder how much training they even get. I mean, in addiction.
Yeah. And that was really interesting for me. Well, for one, for me as a nurse, as long as I've been a nurse, and I have a medical like my family's all medical. My mom was a nurse, my stepdad is a physician who's now retired. But for me to realize, like, how did I not know about this? I look back on my training in nursing school, little to nothing was taught to us. I mean, very little, right? Just a blurb. And that was maybe enveloped into the psychiatric curriculum, which was high level. I mean, all of nursing school and medical school, it's got to be high level, right? And then you specialize as you go. But when it came time to getting help, gosh, I had nowhere. I mean, I didn't know anybody to talk to. I didn't know where to start. And I was really surprised how my nurse friends approached the issue with me, in a sense where they didn't understand addiction and they just weren't having it. And I lost a lot of friends. You would think people in the medical world would be the most understanding and that nurses would know, but they didn't. They just didn't know. And it's really kind of, it's sad, but that's the reality of it. And that's why nurses go back and specialize, and they have you get board certifications in special entities so that you can really do a deep dive into those subjects, but there just wasn't anybody in my little oikos of people that had any knowledge of it. And yeah, it's just not something that comes up.
Did you feel judged? And I mean,
Oh
that would
yeah.
be really hard around your colleagues and
Oh yeah. Incredibly judged. And the medical profession is a heavy drinking profession, right? Nurses drink heavily. It's very stressful. We often work shift work. When I was working 12-hour shifts at the local hospital, and you get off work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I started my nursing career on a ICU step down unit, so it was cardiac care. And I was in my early 20s, and often people coded and died, and there was lots of stuff going on all the time, and that's just one little snippet of my career, but it's very stressful. And most of my nurse friends drank heavily. And then I would even say some physician friends. And so, yeah, we're looking at a high stress profession that also, I don't know, it was almost like there was an us and them mentality. Like the medical people felt like, well, this would never happen to me. Right.
sure. That makes total sense. I would think that I would be the same way. It's like, well, I know too much and I've seen too
Yes.
much, so I
Yes.
certainly won't let myself get like that or
Yes.
whatever it is.
I mean, if you're an interior decorator for a living and you think you're not going to fall trap to those, decorating mistakes or what have you, right? And that was my mindset of, well, I just know enough, and I'm not going to let things like that happen, and I wouldn't do that. I understand, how the body works. And yeah, that level of arrogance just got me nowhere.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. I can imagine. And I think, it is a baffling thing. This is my own self speaking. It was baffling to me when I realized and didn't tell anybody, oh my gosh, this is controlling me. I am not in control of this. Because, prior to that, I had told everybody, oh, I've got it under control. I can stop when I want to. I just don't want to, was
Yeah.
kind of my mantra.
Yeah.
And then when I realized that was totally untrue, that was when it was terrifying because I was alone.
Yeah.
Then I was really alone and I did not ask for help because I didn't want to give it up, you know? And so, yeah, that's a tough spot. And, the whole idea too of the medical profession, like I think about what you're talking about, people coding, passing in front of you. You know, a lot of times I think there's an assumption that people in the medical profession, like, well, they're used to it.
Mhm.
Well, that might be sort of true in one sense, but also, I mean, make no mistake, doctors and nurses are human beings, and that has got to be very jarring on the soul to
Mhm.
see that kind of thing day in and day out. And I'm sure you guys are great at, compartmentalizing and like, okay, this is my job, and then this is, home and trying to put your emotions aside. But I mean, does that affect you still? Did it back then?
Like I said, it didn't really occur to me until I was older and I
Mm.
had the time and the inclination to study what trauma does. And, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk writes a really good book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, yeah.
We sort of hold on and to unprocessed traumas. And,
Mm.
I'm not trying to have any excuses, but I can see now, although I was coming home from work during those days and going on with my life seemingly unfazed, you know, the stress of all of it was definitely compounding. And I did that type of work for 7 years in the beginning of my career. And I was very young. I mean, I was also very young, in my early 20s. I was learning to be a nurse and an adult at the same
Mm.
time. And that's really hard.
Mm.
Also, during that time, is when I really struggled the most with disordered eating. And I later learned that, what came first for me was an eating disorder long before I really had a problem with alcohol. But I see it now as the manifestation of maybe somewhat in the same way an addiction would manifest, that the disordered eating started with anorexia, progressive bulimia, was really due to my mental health issues of anxiety and depression, and sort of manifested just like an addiction would, right? Because food is both a substance, something we utilize in a substance abuse issue, and it's a process addiction too. So
Mm.
eating disorders are both substance and process. And so, yeah, I can see that now again with hindsight, but that took time for me to figure all that out.
Can you explain a little bit more about that? I haven't heard that before about it's both a process and what did you say? It's two things?
Well, so, substance use addictions. So like when we're addicted to a substance or a chemical, like a drug or an alcohol, right? And our body is addicted or dysregulated in a sense where we're shifting to the dope. That is one type of an addiction. But then there's process addictions like gambling or porn or eating or binging. Whereas we're not necessarily ingesting a substance. I mean, you are with food, but it doesn't have a mind and mood altering state or effect like a drug or alcohol would. But people get addicted to the dopamine and the
Mm.
sort of serotonin and the fluctuations in the process of the act itself. And
Makes
so
total sense.
food is really hard
Mm.
because when it comes to people, especially, just for myself, an example, when I struggled with bulimia, part of the process of that
Mm.
was to go hungry during the day, starve. And then with bulimia was to, eat excess amounts of food, even hide excess amounts of food, ingest all that food at one time and sort of get that big rush and then purge. I mean, it was all this big process, right?
Mhm.
And I became I fell into this trap where I became sort of addicted to the whole process itself.
Mm.
And then, of course, the outcomes because I had body image issues. But yeah, food related disorders, it's very tricky.
I bet, because the thing about it is, it's not like you can just quit eating food. Like,
Yeah.
I can say, all right, I'm not drinking, or I'm not gonna use
Mhm.
whatever substance, but food is like, that's forevermore. Our
Yeah.
relationship with food has to be ongoing. And so I can imagine how difficult that is to, and for me also, just in my own, separate way of thinking about food. But it's such a sort of a weird and personal kind of a journey, circuitous route where, because
Yeah.
I've had all kinds of stuff too, where it's like, I've had these pregnancies, and then I know exactly, or I knew back when my metabolism was like prime, how to lose it, and I would lose it by spending a month barely eating. And that was kind of my plan, quote unquote plan, which is PS, like obviously the worst plan ever.
Yeah.
And then, but it was all about like control. If I can control that, then, I'll feel better about myself because I'll be more in control of how I look. And, it was all tied into that. And so, yeah, I think for women especially, that's just such a tough path. And yeah, I admire you for talking about it because it's a huge problem. It's a huge thing. And I mean, now that we have all these weight loss drugs and all of that, and I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do, and I'm not a medical professional, but I think it's a tough road to navigate. Have you found that recently with all these new things coming out too?
Yeah, I'm not a person that would, I don't think I've ever engaged in any of the diet plans or marketing for pills or different types of supplements. That's never been my thing. What was my thing was the sort of the notion of going hungry and reserving all my calories for alcohol.
Mhm.
And that is why I talk about it being so insidious, because I did not plan to become an anorexic or a drunk. We throw around the slang term drunkorexia, and somehow I ended up both. And my life was sort of organized around reserving calories for when I could drink and party and hang out with my friends and go out to lunch and have mimosas. And, I had such a control issue with my caloric intake,
Mhm.
again, because I had the disordered eating, the process addictions, and then, I'm ingesting booze on an empty stomach. And, which quickly, I developed an addiction to the alcohol. Of course, then I developed an addiction to the release and the feeling of the relaxation. And, I'm sort of a, I don't know, a type A person, I'm real driven. I have high energy. With also comes with that is anxiety. And, I've had some depression. So yeah, I mean, that weird cycle with your eating and your drinking, and pretty soon you fall into this trap of drunkorexia. And that's why I really want to address the subject and the phenomenon itself. It's not something we talk about a lot,
Mhm.
especially women. And we're in a lot of circles talking about recovery, but we're not necessarily talking about those times in our life when we skipped the food so that we could drink, and what happened because of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember specifically, I mean, I had forgotten about this, and listening to you really reminded me. I used to do that all the time. I would drink vodka, but I would do it, with Diet Coke. And I hadn't eaten anything yet, but I knew if I ate something, it wouldn't hit me as fast or as potent feeling. And so that was all like planned,
Oh
I
yeah.
just may not have really connected that at the time.
Yeah. I was big on planning all of that. And, as I've progressed and through sobriety and joined a lot of sober circles and meetings, and, meetings online, meetings in person, and you name it, book clubs, I do see a lot of women in particular will admit to struggling with eating disorders as well as addiction. And so I started speaking up a bit more about the eating disorders, especially in circles of recovery, and looking into it myself. And because I feel like the correlation is so strong, and because personally I've seen it in so many groups. I went to She Recovers in Miami last year around this time, and where we, hundreds of women who had met online in various sober circles had gathered live, and we're all by the pool in our bikinis, and the conversation is going about our bodies. And so many of us are talking about how we've been through big time struggles, and or whether we currently struggle. And it felt like it was more taboo to talk about that than it was our drinking.
How interesting. Yeah.
It's more taboo to talk about our weight and our obsession with maybe wanting the third Oreo. It's like, it's just even more, it's something more that we hide. We build these secret behaviors around.
Yeah.
And to me, it feels like it needs to be talked about.
I love this so much because you're right. I'm thinking back to now conversations that I have with my girlfriends about eating and about weight. And generally, they revolve around a couple things, either joking about it, like, oh, and I have said this. In fact, I think I said this in one of my books, is like, I just want to crawl under my covers with a bag of Cheetos. So there'll be kind of a joking mentality about it, but yet there's for sure a thread of truth pierced right through, jokes
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, that's what I wanted to do, is just numb out or whatever
Yeah.
and not use food for fuel. And so, and the other thing I wanted to just say, because this is so fascinating to think about when I'm really taking a moment to like think about this, is I have noticed how often my girlfriends and I, or people who, I know, ladies who I know, will comment on each other's weight if there's been weight loss. They never say anything, of course, if, like I gained a bunch of COVID weight, not a bunch, I gained some COVID weight. And, it's just an interesting thing. People, they don't say anymore, oh, you look really healthy, or they don't say anything. And it's just an interesting thing because as soon as I would starve myself, of course, nobody knew that's what I was doing. I wasn't
Oh, yeah.
advertising it. But after my births, after birthing babies, people would be like, oh my God, you look so good, girl, and all this stuff. And so it reinforced those bad behaviors. I'm going to call them bad, but those
Yeah.
behaviors that weren't great for me. And really, my whole goal was not to just relax into a postpartum body, which some people can do and some people have trouble with. And I fell into that category more, but it sort of gave me like, oh, good, like a pat on the back, like I should keep doing this.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting. And also it's also my age now that I'm like middle-aged person.
Mhm.
And then it leads me, of course, to look at my own behavior about, well, what is it in me that's wanting a compliment or is noticing that absence of compliments, and why, to notice it is one thing, but why is that, or actually is it a deficit in my life right now? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Maybe I need to look at that. So it's just a really powerful topic.
Yeah.
How have you changed your relationship with food since getting sober?
Well, when I first got sober, I think, to be honest with you, for the first maybe year and a half or 2 years, I was sober of alcohol, but I was still starving, binging, purging, that whole thing. And in my mind, I was like, I'm doing it. I'm winning, right? Like, I'm sober. I'm not drinking the booze. And then one day around 2 years sober. So first things first, quit the booze, right? And then around 2 years, I started looking at the other areas of my life where I was ashamed, where I was playing a double agent, where I was one person to people in public, but really I had these secret behaviors, and where it was really hurting me physically and mentally. And I started to decide that I want one version of myself. I just wanted, like, I heard author Laura McCowan say that when she was talking through, it might even be in her book, but wanting one version of yourself where you're not putting on this big show into the public and hiding all these destructive behaviors. And I also felt at about 2 years sober that I was freaking worth it, right? I had gotten back enough self-esteem, self-awareness, brain cells, insight to really look at that and think, I don't want to live like this. I kicked alcohol and it made me want to keep going to improve other areas of my life. And I think you nailed it when you said using food for fuel. So for me, it really came down to figuring out how to intuitively eat and using it for fuel. So that meant I had to eat enough so that I had the energy to do the things I wanted to do and be healthy, not overeat so that I didn't feel inclined or triggered to binge and purge, because I knew my body and I knew what would trigger me either way. And it was a journey. It's still a journey. It'll always be a journey. But I'm going to mention this in my talk tomorrow. One thing that really helped me was getting brutally honest with the people around me and telling on myself, and then explaining how I have fears around certain food. And, if you peer pressure me into ordering a cheeseburger out at a restaurant, there's a good chance I'm going to throw it up. And that is a hard thing for people to hear. But I had to get brutally honest because I had been living a double life, And so the things that people thought they knew about me, Kate loves to go for bottomless pasta. What they didn't understand about me was that I had all these fears around food, and I wasn't able to speak up for myself. So it really came down to getting sober, developing a sense of personal agency and personal power, and gaining the self-esteem to set boundaries and say, and in the beginning, when I very first quit binging and purging, I stuck to a very small group of foods. Like, these are my safe foods. I kind of ate the same thing every day, and then I progressed and started introducing new things before I felt, I had to feel safe with what I was eating. Because I had this one little bird on my shoulder saying, well, this might make you fat. And one little bird on the shoulder saying, maybe you could eat 10 boxes of this. It was just, my mind was so screwed up. So I had a lot of work to do. Intuitive eating and counseling and God, the podcasts and the books and the, meeting with a counselor and being radically honest with my counselor. I mean, I did everything I could, learning about this so that I could help fix it.
Well, I appreciate that. That's huge because, I keep thinking too, like, how when you're in the middle of it, and I say this because I do have two friends right now who are in the thick of their actual disordered eating, like in a crisis phase. And one actually has some pretty bad osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And she broke a bone a year and a half or 2 years ago, and it is still not healed. And she had surgery in the whole 9 yards, but the hardware, the bone wasn't holding the hardware because there wasn't enough of it, or it wasn't strong enough, or I don't know, you would know better than I. But, and she's just like, I can't believe this. I can't believe that my actions have now caused this. And I think it's probably like, when you hear people who have struggled with alcoholism or substance use disorder, it's like, and they'll get pancreatitis or they'll get some kind of something, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm dealing with this. And, so that one friend who had the broken bones, she said, people will say to her, well, just focus on, clean eating or a plant-based diet. And she's like, really? Like, you so don't get it. Like, I mean, this is
Yeah.
the most ridiculous thing to say to somebody like that, and it's like, how do we get some understanding out there? So I think the work you're doing is so important. And I'm wondering, what can we do as fellow human beings to treat each other with kindness? And I think as a friend, right, the big thing that people want to do, they want to run in and save the day or
Yeah.
say something great. What can we do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not an eating disorder therapist or doctor, but I have done a lot of homework and a lot of, studying and work for myself. And I think some of the important things to think about would be, for one, meeting people where they are.
Mm,
Right. Like, so we
huge.
say that a lot in behavioral health, telling a person is deep in the thick of it with their anorexia to just focus on clean eating is not meeting them where they are, right?
No.
Understanding that this person clearly has some, unhealthy beliefs around food and untruths there's a deep mental issues going on way deeper than that with anxiety and depression. And, like I said, I'm not a therapist, but it's oftentimes people, if you don't meet them where they are in their healing and just, let them be where they are, then they're going to turn away from you. And I've made that mistake too, having friends that were deep in it with their disordered eating and thinking that the answer was to approach them and just blast them with what you should do. But really, I probably should have picked up the phone and said, I just want to listen. I'm here. I've been there. And the other thing I think is important is recovering out loud. And I don't think that has to mean getting on a podcast and spilling your family tea like I'm doing. You don't have to write a blog but recover out loud as in maybe tell one person, you know, or even send this podcast in a link to an email of someone you love and say, check this out. I'm kind of going through this. For me, it was absolutely important, just like alcohol, that I wasn't alone. I had to have people around me that understood. And luckily with food and eating, on a spectrum, everyone has struggled in some capacity. It's not like anyone has a perfect relationship with, diet and exercise and body image. And there are people who everyone has bits of a story that they can share. So for me, it's important to just be honest and grab a friend.
I love that because, you know, it is true, that old, saying, we're as sick as our secrets, but it's true. I love that you got to the point where you could say, hey, I need to be honest with you. If you pressure me into eating a cheeseburger, this is what's going to happen,
Yep.
because that puts it in a whole new light for the person that you're with at that time. It's like, oh, okay. Like it really sheds light on, I can be part of this, my friend's positivity today and adding to their life in a positive way, or I can be standing there holding the door open, as they're kind of walking down this other path, which is destructive to them. And so, we get that choice as support people and as friends and as parents. And yeah, I think that's really a sobering, pun intended, thing to think about as people supporting others going through this.
Well, I think you can get fat shamed and you can get skinny shamed,
Yep.
and people love to make comments on, you should eat this, you shouldn't eat this, you should do this. You go out to lunch with a group of friends, and if you're really struggling in a sense with your, with your anorexia or your bulimia, and you order something you feel safe eating, like a salad with maybe a little protein, and your friends all heckle you for being, too skinny and eat the cheeseburger, God, come on, and all the little hecklings, that can be damaging. And I know it's happened to me. You know, at work, when I first was going through this a couple of years ago, I sort of ate the same lunch every day. I packed myself a lunch, and my coworkers was like, "God, you eat the same thing every day so that you can be skinny." But really, in my head, it was like, look, I'm trying to save my own life here. If this
Yep.
means I eat some fruit, a little protein, you know, and I got my portions, and I'm feeling like this is something I can feel good around and safe. I keep using the word safe because it just, the thought of what I was doing to myself with when it came to my disordered eating was so scary. Either severe starvation or extreme binging and purging. By the time I got sober, I had to have 4 teeth pulled.
Wow.
My skin was icky. My, you know, like you said, my bones felt brittle. Your risk for osteoporosis as a smaller boned person is really high because you're not getting enough calcium and nutrients. And my hair, I mean, I was foggy in the head, you know, just there were so many things. I mean, I think I spent $30,000 or $40,000 just at the dentist, you know, like fixing. And so for me, this was really important that I stayed the course and that I ate what I felt safe and that I ate intuitively. Um, until I could get a little bit, you know, closer to the other side, where now these days I'm a lot more loose with what I eat because food doesn't trigger me like it used to. I don't feel like I'm going to binge and purge if someone wants me to eat a cheeseburger. But I'm going to say, look, I will choose what, you know, if I want the cheeseburger, I'll order it, but you're not going to peer pressure me into what to eat or not to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to set that boundary, you know.
I love that because it's a huge practical way too that we can support each other is like, I mean, it's kind of simple in that, hey, let's not comment on each other's food. I
Yeah.
mean, how about we not do that? I mean, I know
Yeah.
it sounds silly, but like I see that all the time. And, I've even been at restaurants. This is so weird, but we have a favorite place that we go, my husband and I, for like our date nights. And once, literally one time, I left probably 3/4 of the meal on the plate, but I was like full at that point, and I just didn't want to eat the rest of it. And they came back and they took it off our bill. And they were like, well, we noticed you didn't eat it. You must not have felt comfortable telling us that you didn't like it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God. And I felt terrible. And I thought, this is not the message that I want to send. But then the alternative was every time I went to a restaurant for the next month, I was like, it's not that I didn't like this. It's that, and then I'm explaining all this. And I didn't want to feel like I had to do that every time. And so now, and I'm not saying this is a great answer, but what I do is I let them box it up for me every single time. And I take it home knowing I'm probably not going to eat it. Maybe somebody else in my house will, but maybe not. But I just feel compelled to do that because it's like someone else's expectation.
Yeah, there's like that people pleasing component to even when it
Yeah.
comes to food,
Mhm.
you know. There's a huge people pleasing component for me, especially too. Like, what are the people around me gonna think? Are they gonna, you know, you can shame someone for ordering a salad and you can shame someone for ordering a pizza.
That's so true. You
It
can't
is,
win.
you can't, and I think when I was going through that at work where people were teasing me about, you know, and they were teasing. I mean, these were great coworkers, but the teasing was every day, and it kind of got to me. You know, when they ordered
Yeah.
pizza from when the Domino's delivery guy would come and I would say, no, I'm not going to have that pizza. In my mind, it was like, look, I'm healing from bulimia. You do not want me to have 12 pizzas in front of me in the middle of a work day. Am I going to say that? No. But in my head, I'm like, you know what? I've got to set these boundaries. I got to do this for myself. Just like quitting alcohol, it was like, I'm saving my own life here. I can't worry about what anybody else thinks. I'm saving my own teeth. It was
Mhm.
like,
Right? Like,
I
I'm
mean,
not going to spend another 40 grand on my
yeah,
teeth.
yes, exactly. But the whole phenomenon of ladies who liquid lunch and being drunk and starving so that you could drink champagne and mimosa. I mean, all of that, it's such a part of womening and peopling, but mostly womening, that we
Mhm.
don't talk about, right? And there's so much people pleasing and lack of boundaries. And when I was organizing the stuff that I wanted to talk about for Saturday, I was thinking, gosh, is this feminist issue? Am I gonna go on like some feminist soapbox here? I think it's a human thing, but with women, it seems to be more prevalent.
Kate, I completely agree. Like, totally agree. Because, I mean, one thing that I have noticed about dudes is like, they don't give a shit what anybody else does. Like, they don't care what any other guy does. I saw this first in parenting. Like, women were always like, well, are you breastfeeding, bottle feeding? Are
Yeah.
doing disposable diapers, or are
Yeah.
you have, and it
Cloth.
was like, always, what are you doing? Because, and I think I'm not a professional, but I think it comes from, and this is only because I have so many insecurities, but I think it comes from that, like, well, I want to see what everybody else is doing to see if I'm normal, or am I doing kind of whatever the right thing is, or it's just like the projection, it's the whole mirroring kind of thing. And like, guys are just like, whatever. Oh, yeah, you're bottle feeding. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah. You want to turn on the
I
game?
know,
Like,
right?
it's just, yeah. And so, yeah, but I love what you said. It's like lack of boundaries. I mean, I hope that we get to this point as women, and we start to, but it starts with realization, right? Of like, oh no, this is actually a damaging practice, that, this commenting on all of these things that people are eating, or pressuring people, or like, oh, same old lunch again, huh? And it's like, yeah, how about we just come alongside each other and champion each other and not say anything about each other's food? I don't know. Is that, so hard? And I think it is. I think it's a habitual,
Yeah,
thing, and a place of trying to find connection for some weird reason through these kind of comments. It's just sort of
I
odd
know.
now that I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, I've had all kinds of things, I'm either too thin or I'm too bloated. I mean, just no, it just never stopped. And that was I don't hear men getting those comments. Yeah, my
Nope.
nobody comments on my husband's love handles. I mean, nobody comments on my husband's body. Everybody is likely to comment so on me. Yeah, so
Yep.
it is tough. But it and when I say that I will probably always be going through it, I don't think I found the magic cure for eating disorders and I'm quote cured. It's just like being in recovery from anything else. It will be an ongoing thing for the rest of my life. And there'll be days when I do better than not. Now, I'm not in the scary parts of it anymore, but there are days when, and there are still triggers and weird thoughts and false beliefs and
Sure.
shame. And so it's helpful for me to keep talking about it and to keep studying, keep listening to speakers and keep reading books. And, you know, I mean, even for treatment for disordered eating, it's really tough to get an inpatient bed somewhere.
Mm.
And it's tough to get your insurance to cover that. You don't find a lot of providers that know a lot about it. There are some treatment facilities locally that you can get in as an inpatient, but it's just like anything else in behavioral health. It's sort of the redheaded stepchild of medicine. And so, we didn't even talk about the stigmas of behavioral health, but I sort of feel like eating disorders kind of falls into that uh, lack of importance when it comes to medical type issues.
Yeah.
Not so much with eating disorders as substance use, because you can die from a disordered eating and from substance abuse, but still.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the mental health component, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know, it seems like we've made progress, which is great, but I feel like it is so just, it's the little tiny tip of the iceberg, right? Like, there is so much underneath it. And what's tough is, for people who haven't struggled with any mental health issues personally, it is few and far between to find those people who haven't struggled with it and understand it or can accept it, when they have had no personal experience with it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
tough.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up, I'm thinking about, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and just how checking in with ourselves is it's got to be just such a crucial part of our day. At least for me, I know, I'll be spinning out about something ridiculous and I'll notice finally that it's ridiculous at some point, or it's just I've over exaggerated it, right? Like I've inflated whatever it is. And I'll just go like, okay, this too is going to pass. Like this will pass. I'm a little amped right now, and
Yeah.
just to have that sense of like, I'm just going to let this thing cool off. I'm not going to act on this right now. And whatever it is, right? Like that applies to my crap TV I like to watch or like online shopping or whatever. Like, I'm like, it's a good practice for my life personally. And I'm just wondering what your favorite tool is, if you have a favorite tool that helps you, if you ever experience, kind of an acute difficulty in any of those areas regarding addiction.
Well, I will say this might sound kind of cliche, but one thing that's been really helpful for me is going on walks.
Yes.
I have a treadmill across the hall in my home office, and I don't tell myself I need to exercise. I tell myself I just need to put one foot in front of the other.
Yes.
And of course, now that the weather's better, I can get outside and walk. But telling myself that exercise is going to be the way that I, provide self-care is kind of hooey. In fact, that's total bullshit. Like some days I don't want to exercise, but I can walk slowly, even. I can swing my arms, and often I'll do a podcast in my ear or a audiobook. Audiobooks have probably saved my life throughout the course of recovery, and just walking and listening. And oftentimes my thoughts will wander, and I can't speak enough about walking with an audiobook, like what little simple,
I love that. I love that so much. I love the whole change in environment.
Yep.
Get a little movement going. It is crazy how your perspective can change, right?
Yep.
It's incredible. Kate, I cannot tell you what a joy it has been to have you on today. You have such a beautiful, radiant light about your whole spirit. So I really have enjoyed this chat with you today. And I want to be sure that you tell us where, people can find you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm on Instagram at Kate Vitela, and that's my name. I don't have a cool Instagram handle. I just launched my own website about 6 months ago with the help of Elise from the Sober Curator. And it's just katevitela.com. And I am really working on entering into more speaking arenas to storytell and to get the message out. I'm not really selling anything. I'm not selling my story in a sense, but I think storytelling is so healing. And
healing.
I love it. So I'm no stranger to being on stage. So yeah.
So fantastic. Thank you so much. And one last thing I want to throw in there, another thank you. Thank you for those curtains that you gave Elise for the Sound of Sober rendition that Elise and I did, this musical number. It would not have been the same without your curtains.
Hilarious.
So thanks for that, girl.
It was a very Gone with the Wind moment. I'm like, those are my curtains.
You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, Kate, thank you so, so much. And for everybody listening, remember to be kind, rewind. Thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.